It's a pleasure to be with you and a pleasure to be with my co-host, Mr. Jason Gaunt, aka the Professor Sanchez Gaunt Capital Management. How are you, my friend?
I am doing quite well. Do we have 5 green days in a row
Count them. The number on
this
your
week, right?
fingers. We
Yeah.
do. We do.
And if I
Five
had some
green days.
extra digits, I think we could count those too, right?
We may have to take our shoes off and start counting if we keep this momentum going. I tell
I
you.
know. I
Yeah.
know.
He's pretty amazing. Absolutely amazing. Well, it was one heck of a day today. We're going to give you a brief recap as to what happened, and we'll be joined shortly, we hope, by our Nevada State Treasurer, Mr. Zach Conine, to discuss the fiscal health of our great state. But in the meantime, my friend, it is you and I to get into what is going on in this crazy market. We go back to this morning. Well, let's go back to yesterday. We actually had a
Yeah.
pretty decent day yesterday. Things started to look really good in the after hour session. Some news was, we'll say, coming our way in regards to
Mhm.
China saying, hey, you know what? We're going to open the door a little bit for some discussions with the Trump administration. That jumped the futures up. We come in this morning, futures are still up. And then we get the Goldilocks non-farm payroll number. 7,000 jobs. That was the icing on the cake, Jay. That was the
It
icing on
really
the cake.
was. Yeah, it really was. It was not expected. I sort of was thinking that we were gonna see a government bomb drop of a ton of the non-farm numbers to the negative side. Yeah, I think the market in general was cautiously at least hoping that we would get a better than expected number. And I think Goldilocks is perfect. I know they revised the prior number lower a touch, which I know you'll touch on, but even that private payrolls number at 167,000 was about 40,000 higher than consensus.
The consensus. How about higher than the 62,000 ADP told us about a couple of days
Right,
ago?
well, I know that one's your favorite, so I
It
didn't wanna,
really is.
say
Good
he
gosh.
hates it with the heat of
Why?
100 suns.
Why do they even bother putting the number out when they're so far off? They were doing pretty good. They had narrowed it down to an average. I think it was about 25,000 that they were missing by. Right. That was the difference. But yeah, when you get in 167,000 versus 162,000, let's see, just a mere 103,000 difference or so. No big deal
Amongst friends, I mean, come
among
on,
friends.
But factory orders, very good number, right?
Factory orders were good.
Up
Yep.
4.3%. Prior was roughly in line, so no real shocks to the downside. But maybe all of this near-term concern of a impending recession may be a little bit lower than folks thought, and that's been, to some extent, what we've been talking about, a fear on the horizon as
Mhm.
maybe this summer we start to get some of the lag effect because these are still March numbers, even though this was an April non-farm payroll number.
Right.
Most of the data we're getting is still fairly lagged. So you could start to see a bit of a weakness ahead. We'll get ISM on Monday, I believe. So that may be another item that the market looks for. But aside from Apple, which was down 3% today, it seems like the earnings were good enough on the mega cap side and caught everyone wrong way where certainly the boo birds were out. And I think you've gotten a fair amount of chasing by those that were underinvested off those lows.
Mhm.
And if it's not real bad, it's been real good. You've seen Meta strong, Microsoft strong, some of the other Halo names too. But yeah, the,
And,
the
and, and
market's
you
been
know what I think?
resilient.
You know what I think is amazing is you really did not get a lot of negative guidance from
No,
the Mag 7 as far as, hey, things are going
quite
to
to
be
the
bad. Now,
contrary.
yeah,
Yeah.
just the contrary. I mean, Microsoft was very bullish about the future. We got a little bit from Apple yesterday on their earnings numbers in regards to Tim Cook indicating, yeah, we're looking at probably $900 million hit, due to the tariffs. What's $900 million? That's what they
They
have in
just
the
made that in their bank account.
yeah, exactly. They have that in the petty cash account, I am sure. But I was, to be honest with you, I was a little disappointed in Apple's performance today. They I think they unfairly beat the stock up, and I think it's something that everyone needs to pay very close attention to and say, you know what, was it really relevant that they pounced the stock down, like you said, 3.7%, $7.97 loss, 205.35. I mean, just a very, very light on the service revenue side, but everything else, iPhone sales, et cetera, look good. They said, look, we've moved a lot of business manufacturing over to India. Then the analysts come out and go, "Oh, India can't keep up with the demand," so you got that downside of it. So, yeah, kind of mixed. But you're right. That was one of the.
It's Apple's a tough one, right?
It is. It's love or hate.
You
There's
know,
nothing in between.
You know me, I'm never short on analogies, right? It's sort of trying to remember your ex-girlfriend, but 20 years ago, right? And people are still in love with that story of what Apple was, but In my mind, it's more like a consumer staple at this point, right? It's the most of the front edged things that they did before, where the iPhone was this generationally changing item, and it was. Well, what's next, right? I mean, they sort of are the follower on of most, and they do historically wait and then let everyone else poke through the bugs and then come out with the great version of someone else's idea. But they're way behind on AI from what we've seen. They're truly just waiting, even though they claimed on their call that they're doing work on their own large language models internally, and they're rolling out some AI features, which they have the most data of almost anyone. But there's not a lot of glitz or glamour in that story. Their goggles were terrible. No one used them. They made you seasick. The iPad has sort of lost some of its luster, even though it is the go-to for folks in the YouTube read in bed world. What is the next thing for Apple? It's not
Yeah.
really growing. In fact, it's not growing. So why are you paying 25 to 30 times sales for a
That's the
stock
issue.
that's,
That's the
you
issue.
know,
I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very expensive stock from a
it is
valuation.
for what you're getting. It's an amazing company. It's going to be around for a long time, but so is Procter and Gamble. So is Campbell's Soup, right? And so I think at some point, until they have their next big catalyst that can move this, almost are they 3 trillion? Yeah, $3 trillion carrier. It's going to be hard, and
It
so
is.
I think they're going to be running into this for some time. It's become a show me story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we still have it in our portfolio. We're holding on to it, but again, it's either, yeah, you love it or meaning Wall Street, you love it or you hate it. They beat it up when, uh, it just doesn't hit every single mark. It's priced for perfection. It's an
Yeah,
expensive stock, but
perfectly
it's
said.
also one of those. Yeah, it's also one of those where you cannot not own it. Right? You have to have it in the portfolio. It's just such a staple. All right, let's real quick as we wait for Mr. Conan to join us here. Let's hit the non-farm payroll numbers. You touched on these. I want to go into a little bit more detail. So the street was looking for about 133,000 jobs that have been created, quite a bit less than the two. What was it, 220? I believe was the previous month. So okay, a little bit of a slowdown. We got 177,000, as you'd mentioned. They did revise. Oh, it was 228. Excuse me. They did revise the 228 down to 185. Private sector job growth, as you said, 167. That was revised to 170 from the previous 209. But if you look at some of the internals of there, the average hourly earnings were up 0.2%. They were looking for about a 0.3% increase, so a little bit of a miss there. Unemployment rate, as expected, did hold steady at 4.2%. Average work week, 34.3 hours. So everything was fairly in line, and like I said, kind of a Goldilocks type of report.
It was, and I think we needed it, especially given some of the volatility that we've had over many of the last sessions to, at least show that things aren't coming to a complete standstill, despite what you'll see on your favorite television program.
Exactly. I think things are going to be just fine. All right, folks. Well, it is with great honor that we bring on our very special guest this Friday afternoon on the Jon Sanchez Show, Mr. Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer. Zach, happy Friday. Welcome to the program. How are you?
I am just fine. Thanks for having us. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We're, municipal bond people, not radio people. So it's all very exciting.
Well, we hope to make this such a fun interview for you, Zach, that you become a regular part of the Jon
Yeah.
Sanchez Show. And we're the voice. We're Northern Nevada's money show, so we've got to get you on more frequently on this one and keep Northern Nevada up to date on what is going on in that massive portfolio you have.
We love Northern Nevada and we love money. So I feel like we're in the right place.
Hey, we're all together.
Perfect.
But
Perfect.
we're all that's right. That's right. Well, Zach, again, in all seriousness, great to have you on the program this afternoon. And we have a lot of things we want to discuss with you. We've got about 1 minute before we go to break. So let's use this minute, Zach, to give the audience a little bit of bio on yourself, a little bit of background, if you may.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a lawyer by trade. Joined the treasurer's office in 2019. Got elected in 2018. We've been doing it ever since. Before that, we did a lot of different corporate law. Kind of one of those lawyers that tries to solve problems as opposed to the ones that create problems. I know,
Right.
it
Nice.
makes a
Yeah.
market. And before that, I spent some time in equities at a hedge fund that was Las Vegas based with a New York
Did
office.
you?
Long, short
Interesting.
generalists by trade.
You're talking to a former hedge fund manager right
Nice.
there.
Cool.
Yes, you're talking
Fantastic.
his on
And then
short.
before that, I was in gaming, spent some time at the Golden Nugget and some other joints downtown. And before that, I grew up in New York, went to school at the hotel school at Cornell, and here we are.
Cool.
Beautiful, beautiful. Did you ever find, yeah, think in your path as you were graduating school and going through all the different jobs, did you ever anticipate that you'd be running the state treasurer's office?
Well, I'm the 23rd treasurer of the great state of Nevada. Can I assure you that absolutely none of us thought growing up that we would be the treasurer
Do
of
you
the
just
great state of
fall
Nevada?
into it, or do you have such a love for money that you want to do it? How do you fall into that position?
Yes.
You know, we
Quote,
got
quote, fall in.
we got asked, or in my case, my wife got asked. Senator Reid
No kidding.
had heard about some of the work we had done, and he came up to my wife at an event and said, as sometimes worked in Nevada back in the day when the senator was still with us, he came up to her at an event and was like, "Hey, I think your husband would be a great treasurer. Come see me." And here we are.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Jason and I were joking as we were prepping for the show this afternoon. We were joking, saying, I don't see anything in Zach's bio about him running money. So I'm curious how he got into, being in the state treasurer's office. But now we know you do have some money in the
Love it.
experience in the background. That's great. That's Jason. That's dangerous. I thought you were, dangerous as a hedge fund manager and portfolio manager, Jason. But now we have Zach, who has your experience, plus he's an attorney. So that's a pretty dangerous
Yeah.
combination.
Cheers.
Well, look, there's a reason I'm in the public sector, right? I think we realized that there was a lot of great work to do in money management, and
Absolutely.
then we opened a whole bunch of restaurants, and then wanted to give a little bit back to the community. So we do
Very
very
cool.
much appreciate Jason and other
Yeah,
taxpayers,
exactly.
because
Yep.
we need it.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Write the checks, no doubt about it. Well, speaking of that, when we come back from this break, Zach, I want to get things started by talking about, for those not familiar, just real short introduction as far as what does the treasurer's office really do? Because you have a vast number of responsibilities. I think a lot of people have no idea what they are, and then we're going to start delving into the fiscal health of our great state of Nevada. All right, with that said, let's turn it over to Kristen Snow. She's in the Right Now Traffic Center. Hello, Kristen. Welcome back to the Jon Sanchez Show on News Talk 780 KOH with Jason Gaunt of Sanchez Gaunt Capital Management, and of course, our very special guest, our Nevada State Treasurer, Mr. Zach Conine. All right, once again, we finished with a nice gain on the market, 564-point rise on the Dow, 1.39%. Nasdaq up 267, S&P higher by 83. All right, Zach, let's get down to it. Roll up our sleeves. Give the audience a brief background of what the Treasurer's Office does, because it is a vast, vast amount of responsibility.
For sure. So the treasurer's office, the treasurer is one of 6 constitutional officers here in Nevada. So you've got the governor, the lieutenant governor, secretary of state, state treasurer, state controller, and the attorney general. The treasurer and the controller are the 2 financial officers. And the easiest way to tell us apart, outside of the fact that Controller Matthews has me by about a foot and is fully bald, is the controller is the state's chief accountant, and I'm the state's chief investor. So I'm not an accountant by trade. We do a fair amount of accounting in our office, right, to make sure things balance. But the controller takes care of the books, and we basically take care of the state's cash flow and investments. So 6 main departments in the treasury. We'll go through them quick. Happy to answer any questions there, of course. But one is cash, all cash in and out of the state. So when you register your car, when you start a business, when you send money to the state of Nevada, thanks so much. It comes to me. When the state pays for anything, that also comes from me. So anytime you're getting paid as a vendor or getting a rebate or anything else, it's got my slightly too messy for my
Thank you.
mother's liking signature on the bottom right-hand corner. In between the time we
And you signed every one of those checks
every single
individually, I
one.
know.
The amount of carpal tunnel I have
I
is
can imagine
really,
it's huge.
it's like the big dig sort of in my, but so
Exactly.
we in between the time we get it and the time we spend it, of course, we invest in. So we manage a portfolio depending on the day between about $9 and $10 billion directly. And that's our investments team. We've had a lot of success there. We have now made more money in investments than every other treasurer. I'm the 23rd. So if you take the first
No
22 and you
kidding.
add them all together,
Congratulations.
we have
Nice.
now doubled that. So we're pretty
We
excited
do have an
about that
opening when
number.
you're out of office, by the way.
Yeah.
Sanchez Gun Capital Management.
Yeah,
Nicely
we're
done.
pretty pumped about it. So we make about $400 million a year in investments, which is up from
No
about
kidding.
12 when I took office, which is pretty good as numbers
Very
go.
good.
We're also responsible for all debt. So whenever the state borrows money to pay for a road, a bridge, a sewer treatment plant, we borrow it, which makes us responsible for Nevada's credit rating. Since I've taken office, we've gotten 3 credit rating upgrades. We're 1 step under prime, which is primarily a function of just how much PERS liability is out there. They'd, of course, love your pension to be fully funded. Ours is doing pretty well, but it's not fully funded. And so that's really our big step before we would get to prime. But so we issue debt on behalf of the state. And then most treasurers, depending on which state you're looking at, they do those things. And then every treasurer has picked up other responsibilities. The treasurer for Florida, for instance, the CFO is actually the state's fire marshal. So he gets a ceremonial
You're kidding.
axe. I do not. get a
So
ceremonial
don't
axe.
complain your plate's too full, Zach. You can have it a lot
It
worse.
really
Yeah.
it haunts me. I mean, this guy and his acts anyway. But we manage all the state's college savings programs. So the state has about $38 billion of 529 assets under management, both directly and through our partners. We manage those. We manage the Governor Gwynn Millennium Scholarship. We manage Nevada's prepaid tuition program, which I'm proud to say is the most solvent prepaid tuition program in the history of the universe. That's a fun
Other
little
classes
political
have.
fact because they've only been around for about 25, 30 years, right? So I get all the time of the dinosaurs to take credit for being better than. Outside of college savings, we have unclaimed property. Unclaimed property is this fun little government party gift where you lose money along the way. It gets sent to us and then we send it back to you. So we're one of the few government agencies that actually sends money to people as opposed to the other way around. We like that.
Yep.
And then our most recent department is financial literacy and security, which is really focused on giving Nevadans the tools they need in order to prepare for the future, right? So we've taken a pretty broad,
Explain
expansive
that.
view
Go
of
for it.
investments. And kind of tried to lean it into anything where you can take a little bit of opportunity off the table now to create a little bit more later. That's our focus in the Treasury.
Go into that literacy side a bit, Zach.
Yeah, so we have
What exactly
found,
is it?
as I'm sure you have, that there are infinite players in the space doing financial literacy, right? Here's how to manage a checkbook. Here's the difference between a credit card and a debit card. Here's the difference between taking out debt to go to college and taking out debt to buy a motorcycle, right? And taking out debt to go to the movies. We found that space to be pretty full, but what we realized were that a lot of Nevadans didn't have the tools they needed in order to take advantage of the advice we were giving them. For instance, we tell folks, "Hey, you need to save for retirement, right? You need to save for college. You need to be thinking about these things now." And they would say, "Okay, what's the best way for me to save for college?" And we'd say, "Well, get a Roth IRA, right? You can get a Roth IRA, save for retirement." And they'd be like, "Cool, I went to Charles Schwab and I needed to show up with $500 and I don't have $500, right?
Right.
Or I tried to get one through my office and frankly, we didn't have it at the office, right? And so all of those things led us to put together a division that would help provide some of those resources. So one of those things, for instance, is our Nevada Employee Savings Trust, which goes live about 2 months from today on July 1st. And that will actually provide for any employee in the state of Nevada who does not have a retirement plan through work, they'll be able to take advantage of this, pool money together and start what will be functionally a Roth IRA at no cost to the employers and very low cost to the citizen.
We got to have you back on the show when that when that launches, Zach. That's a powerful retirement savings tool. Did not know that even existed.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
we're pretty excited about it.
Love it. Yeah, I bet you are. So a lot of things. Real quickly before we go to break, I know Jason, you're probably thinking like I am. All right, Zach said you're making what 400 million so on the returns and things. How in a minute, if you can, how does the state invest its money?
So
This
we
pool of money
invest
you're
our
talking about.
money in sort of like the original Warren Buffett context, right? So the best way to make money is to not lose money. Second best way to make money is to not lose money. And then sort of deeply, deeply down the line, we look for opportunities. So our focus, of course, first of all, is just making sure the state has the cash flow necessary to pay its bills. That is what we spend our time doing. Over the years, we've gotten a little bit better at taking some opportunity in between the time that we knew the bill was coming and the time the bill came due. The state, for instance, 10 or so years ago, used to actually prepay its bills. So we'd have like a net 30 bill and we'd pay it on net 1, which I'm sure was great for somebody, but wasn't great for the taxpayer, right?
Now there's carry.
Yeah, right. We are fans of float in the Treasury. And so we invest in very, very boring things, treasuries, agencies, right? Some very, very high-end commercial credit, just very boring investments with the goal of frankly never showing up in the newspaper, but hitting singles over and over again. I usually make a joke at this point that we have a pretty robust NFT portfolio, but you guys are professionals, so I won't do that to you.
Yes.
But yeah,
Exactly.
it's really boring stuff, but we've gotten good at it and we've gotten good at it in scale. And when you're able to do that, you find some real opportunity.
Any equity exposure or alternatives?
Nope, no equity exposure directly. The state actually has a constitutional prohibition against owning equities with taxpayer dollars.
Interesting.
This is a very long story that I'm happy to go into, but basically around the time that our constitution was being written, there were some states in the Midwest that were getting, I think the colloquial term would be punched in the teeth by some bad equity investments in railroads. And so when our constitution was written, it was very clear that we could not own parts of companies, which of course these days means we can't own equities directly. So most of our exposure, with the exception of a small sovereign wealth fund and a few other carve outs, but most of our exposure is on the debt side.
Excellent. Love it. Our very special guest this afternoon is Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer. When we come back, we're going to talk about, many of you saw it in the Reno Gazette-Journal this morning, the Economic Forum, which is comprised of 5 people appointed by the governor. They make the official recommendations to Zach's office and many others. They're projecting a $173 million less spend, as we will call it, over the next 2 years. Why? As they're blaming President Trump's economic policies. We're going to get Zach's opinion if this is indeed something that we'll say keeps him up at night. Let's turn it over to Greg Neff. He's got news, traffic, and weather. Welcome back to the Jon Sanchez Show on News Talk 780 KOH with our very special guest, Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer, and of course, Jason Gaunt. Once again, a nice day on the market to wrap things up. 564 gain, NASDAQ up 267, and the S&P higher by 83. Well, as I mentioned before we went to break, many of you probably saw the article in the Reno Gazette-Journal this morning that the Economic Forum, which again is comprised of 5 people appointed by the governor, which makes the official recommendations for how much money the state is likely to have for its budget, something that Zach, of course, deals with all day, every day. And that way the legislature knows what they have to spend or not spend. Nevada has a $173 million less to spend over the next 2 years because of President Trump's economic policies, according to the Economic Forum. So, Zach, this is something all of us that deal with money are dealing with, the president's agenda, the tariffs, etc. What is this report telling you with $173 million less that the state can spend?
Well, I think it's telling us that generally uncertainty is bad for business, and uncertainty is really bad for Nevada, right? The old saw is every time the rest of the country gets a cough, Nevada gets the flu, and we see that. A majority of state revenues are based on discretionary actions. People have to go and want to gamble. People have to want to go see a show. People have to come here. When we have uncertainty in the economy sort of writ large, we feel it here, and we're starting to, right? We're seeing gaming tax receipts falling. Obviously, the Economic Forum is forward-looking, and we're dealing with information in the past, but we're seeing that softness. We're seeing international tourism falling, frankly, off a cliff, worse than it did right before the pandemic, and really had recovered quite a bit
A lot of
since then.
Canadians, I imagine, not coming, right?
Canadians is a huge group, but basically pick any country, right? Forward-looking bookings are slowing down. There's some thought that a weaker dollar could drive some additional travel from Europe, but I got to tell you,
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say
that is 100% real. But we could quadruple the business coming from, say, Spain, and it's not going to get anywhere close to the business we're losing from Canada, right? And so broadly, what the Economic Forum is trying to do for any of your listeners or for folks is they're the ones who say how much sand is in the sandbox, right? They say here's how much revenue we think the state's going to get in at all these different revenue categories, and then the legislature and the governor basically allocate where that sand is going to go. And they do this in December, which lets the governor put together his governor's recommended budget, which then gets sent over to the legislature. It's where the budget is now. And then May, what happened yesterday on May 1st is a true up. And in that true up, they found a little bit more money coming in the current fiscal year and less money expected for the 2 fiscal years after it. And primarily all of it driven by uncertainty and sort of a question, I think, and a pessimism around what those policies are going to do, kind of in 2 ways, right? One, what the actual policy will do, what the impact of, say, a tariff will be, and 2, some of the, if we can call it what I think it is, like some of the schizophrenia around tariffs on, tariffs off, tariffs on, tariffs off.
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, you are dealing with today's finances for the state, right? Here's what we have in the bank account. Here's what we have in the investment, so on and so forth. Here's the bills now. What the Economic Forum strikes me as, and I'm not criticizing them by any means, Zach, is they're like a Wall Street analyst saying, I think XYZ company is going to report $2.20 a share 2 years from now. Nobody knows the future, but someone, I guess, has to guess it.
Right.
How much do you put into that credence that that's 2 years is a long ways? And we know with this president, things could change, tomorrow morning and the tariffs could be gone or whatever the case is. I think what the worst is behind us. So how do you factor that in your projections and cash flows, et cetera?
Well, I think, when we're making plans to make sure the state is able to pay its bills, we're doing so with a certain mindset, right? The Economic Forum's job, legally, statutorily, is to give a target because Nevada is required to have a balanced budget. In order to have a balanced budget, you have to make a decision on where revenues are going to be. And sometimes they're high and sometimes they're low. Both of these things have happened in recent history. I think historically, the Economic Forum is inclined to round down. right? Because when they round down and the government makes more money, when more revenue comes in than they're expecting, then we have more money, right? And we've been
Right.
able to do things like get the rainy day fund up to about 26%, right? More than $1.2 billion, down from $0 during the pandemic. That's an okay outcome, right? You leave some opportunity on the table, but nothing bad happens. When they are too high, when they are too optimistic, then the legislature has to come back in a special session and make cuts. And cuts are always harder than making choices not to spend in the first place. So I think the economic forum has to do what it's doing. I think, and they said this, right? This is a period of massive uncertainty. I mean, I wouldn't feel comfortable telling you what the cash flow situation. I feel as uncertain about revenues as I did in March of 2020. I just don't know
That was
what's
going to be
going to
my
happen.
next question. How does this compare to the pandemic time period for you?
Yeah, and I think like the difference, right, is even in March of 2020, right, when the governor made the choice to shut down the strip and called and said like, hey, are we going to be okay cash flow wise? And I said, I don't know. How long is gaming going to be shut down? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, then I don't know. Right, like we didn't know. There were known unknowns, as Rumsfeld said, were pretty significant. Right now, it's the same level of uncertainty, but the thing that we had then that we don't have now is we were relatively sure at that stage that there was going to be massive, and there was over the top federal support, right? That this was going to be a federal government is going to show up and they are going to provide for services, they're going to provide for health response, and they're probably going to provide for some level of economic stimulus to deal with this thing. I don't know of anyone who does what I do professionally who thinks that the federal government's going to show up with a bunch of money right now, right? And
Just the
so
opposite, right? They're
the
causing the
opposite,
problem,
right? And
in a
so
sense.
that we're dealing with that right now. Like at any given point, the federal government owes me $4 or $5 million for services that have already been provided by the state, right? And so I'm just kind of like waiting, checking my
Send them to
bank account
collections.
to see if see when the
Checks
money's
in the
going to
mail,
come in.
Zach. Checks in the mail.
Yeah, right. And that's not like, again, if you're in the business of business, if you're anyone, if you're gonna used to be in restaurants, if you're gonna like open a new restaurant location or open for dinner when you weren't open for dinner before, how do you do that right now in this kind of uncertainty?
Well, that's the question we have for you is how do you manage the state's budget and paying the bills and everything you have to do under your responsibility when you don't know how long the tourist revenue is going to be down and so on and so forth? And then a follow-up question is, please explain to the audience, what are our major sources of revenue here in the state of Nevada?
For
So we
sure.
can kind
So
of do both of
I'll
those.
take the second one first because it's easier. Biggest one's sales tax. Second biggest one's gaming. After that, you've got payroll tax, which is basically a function of people working, right? So again, it's demand driven for the most part. It's a little bit more resilient. And then you get into things like the treasurer's investment returns, which are 4 or 5, depending on the month you look at. Live entertainment tax, which is taxes on sort of sporting events that happen, Taylor Swift, etc. The treasurer's interest returns got higher than the live entertainment tax. I told my wife we were bigger than Taylor Swift, and that landed about as you would expect. And then you get into things like the commerce tax, which is taxed on relatively large businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But the biggest ones, right, gaming and sales tax, which make up around 70% of our revenue, those are all based on people wanting to spend money, right?
Discretionary spending.
And I want to spend the money less, and I cannot constitutionally lose my job, right? Unless like there's a vote of the people, right? So I think if that's what's happening in the economy, if that's how people are feeling, as we've often saw, recessions sometimes start in the head and in the heart before they start in the actual environment. And that's kind of how it feels now. And when you ask like, how do we manage through this process? Like everything else, we're a little more cautious, right? The amount of maturity, the amount of time we have before the portfolio matures is less than it was. We are sitting on more cash than we were sitting on a year and a half ago, primarily because we don't know whether or not the federal government is going to show up and pay the things that the federal government has told us to spend money on.
Do you talk to the federal government on a daily, weekly basis to kind of get an idea what's going on?
So it depends, right? So in some departments, the folks that we talk to no longer work there. They got doged. And so we don't have anyone to call us back. We do get calls occasionally from the White House's Intergovernment Affairs where they send us like, here are the executive orders for the week. And then we're like, cool, can we have our money? And they're like, sorry, who's this?
Checks in the
And so,
mail.
there's like a fair amount of that. I
This
expect
is what you read about, Jason. This is real life
it's
stuff.
great.
That's actually,
Yeah.
This is awesome.
and
I got like
Behind the
popcorn
scenes.
so
here. This
sometimes
is
you get a call back, sometimes you don't, right? Depending on what the urgency of the thing is, the more likely you're going to get a call back. And generally, look, I happen to be a Democrat. The president happens to be a Republican. And so sometimes, like, the governor can get a better answer, right, from the
Yeah.
White House than the other way around. And is how it is. Certainly the Biden White House was more responsive and returned calls, but I think that's sort of because they had people in some of the jobs whose responsibility is to return calls.
All right. Great insight. Our very special guest this afternoon is Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer. We'll come back and conclude our interview with him after these messages. At first, let's turn it over to Kristen Snow right now, Traffic Center. Hello, Kristen. Welcome back to the Jon Sanchez Show on Newstalk 780 KOH with Jason Gaunt of Sanchez Gaunt Capital Management, our very, very absolutely special guest that I hope you've had a good time, Zach, so we can invite you back as
Yeah.
we're just not even scratching
Every
the
Friday.
surface. Every Friday. There you
I
go.
like it.
The Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer's Friday episode. No, seriously. We got to get you back because I know there's a lot of things people want to know. So we've enjoyed it. We're having some great conversations off air. Like I said, we haven't even got to a fraction of the things we want to talk about. I got a personal question for you, though. You ready? What keeps Zach Conine awake at night
Well, that's a
from
good
a
question.
fiscal standpoint?
Well, Zach Conine has a 20-year-old German Shepherd Corgi mix named Democracy, who is really going through
And
it
you have
right
Liberty,
now.
too, right?
What's that?
And you got another one named Liberty, right?
So
You have
we
Democracy?
had Liberty passed. She was 18. She passed a couple of months ago. Got to update that
18.
bio because it keeps making me sad. But so right now we have Democracy, who's 20, German Shepherd Corgi, and then we have Kino Tonopause, who is
Tonopause.
a Labrador who's about a year and a half old. So they keep me up a little bit. I think the thing that we are constantly thinking about in the Treasury, right, is because you have sort of finite time to do these jobs, right? I get to be treasurer for another 620 something days, and constitutionally. And so we've been able to get such great work done. How do we make sure that that work continues? How to make sure that, the next treasurer has all the tools that he or she needs to be as successful as we've been able to be? And how do you make sure that you don't just kind of start over, right? Because I think, well, plenty of people can argue about should government be bigger or should government be smaller. Nobody wants government to be inefficient. And so, when we think about our time, the thing that really keeps me up at night is making sure that whoever the next treasurer is can find the same level of success and joy in some pretty goofy, unsexy work that we have. And at the same point that we can keep looking for ways to help.
Beautiful.
You know what the interesting thing is, John?
Yeah.
If I were to hear that from someone else, I would think that it was just a line. Like he's very genuine. It's neat to hear. I can tell you really enjoy the job, and I could not think of, just speaking to the time we have, anyone better suited to be in that seat.
I agree. And I was just going to ask, can you be reelected or is there a term limit?
I am constitutionally prohibited. I will join a grouping of, I think, 4 living people who cannot be Nevada State Treasurer, which is sort of weird.
Wow.
I've never had a job where I knew where the end was. Right? That's just never right. I've left jobs and I've finished consults, and I've had legal clients not need my help anymore. Right? That's all happened. But I've never had a job where I knew where the end was before. But there is. And I don't know any other way to say it. There is some joy in knowing that the work ends on a date specific so that you can focus on the transition and landing the plane and what's next. Like, you can find some other good work to do because you know when it's happening, right? There's so much in the world where we just don't know. We don't know if we're going to wake up tomorrow, right? But I know how long I get to do this.
What's that like when you said the 600 plus days? Is that like a ticking time bomb in your mind? I don't mean that in a negative sense. Like, I want so many. I mean, we can tell you're such a successful man. You've had an incredible career at a young age. It's like, oh my God, I only got 600 plus days to get this done. Push, 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 push. Is that what happens in reality?
Yeah, I think it creates a level of urgency, and it also creates like a level of pleasant anxiousness, right? It's not I'm waiting for the alarm to ring because I have to leave the fun party. It's we're waiting for the alarm to ring because the brownies are done, right? Or we're waiting for the recess bell to go. We know that if we continue to do this work at the level that we've done it, we are making the state better. So we have this much time to make the state better in this way. And then we go and figure out another great way to make the state better, right? Like, I mean, it is a blessing to know how much time you have because it really lets you make the choice at any given moment, right? How am I making sure my opportunity cost is as high as possible? How am I making sure that the work we're doing for the state is the best work we can be doing for the state at the moment that we're doing it? Because we know we can't do it forever.
And as the largest proponent of term limits of anyone that I know, we're going to be playing that wonderful speech to all of our senators and House of Republican members so they can have the same level of focus that you have. So thank you.
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I'm a fan of term limits, but I am a fan of finding the bright side in things. So, you know.
Well, it's a massive responsibility you uphold. And I was going to joke with you when you were saying, what's next, what's going to happen in your life, going forward. And I'm sure there's a million different incredible paths you will take. But the bright side, unless you go back into the hedge fund world, you probably will never manage so much money, right? There's the downside. There's the upside. You don't have that bigger responsibility like you did now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking forward, I suppose, at some point to being able to check an account balance on my phone and not having to turn it horizontally. I mean, I guess that's a positive.
I love that. Jason, go ahead and wrap us up with our final question.
No, I think really appreciate the call, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. We're out of time there, John.
Absolutely, we are. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, Zach, and thank you so much. And again, we do hope to have you back. Zach Conine, Nevada State Treasurer. God bless. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you, Zach.
Thank you so much.